Hello everybody and welcome to another video in the world of usually fixing and tinkering. Today it's Rover 45. What am I going to talk about? Easy peasy lemon squeezy. This has come up several times on other YouTubers' videos, Rover orientated videos. It was actually a Rover 75 video, believe it or not, on a big YouTuber's channel. And I just flipped through to watch the video, and I had a bit of like 10-minute video. It wasn't very long, and a couple of the comments actually really annoyed me on that particular video from random people who I think either say they've either done some of this work in the past, or they've obviously done it wrong. Because I'm gonna have to put this right here. This is really important on a Rover K series, and people still keep debating it, and I'm not quite sure why, because it's very, very clear. Rover K series, what do you use? Elastomer or MLS? Rover K series, head gasket failures are common, and we need to know how to deal with it, particularly if you can do it at home. I tell you, you can do this at home. I did it. I'd never changed the head gasket in my life, and I changed the head gasket on that, and it's absolutely fine. It has fantastic compression, no loss of coolant, engine runs like a Swiss watch, and it's almost like the whole process was like Rover design. It's almost like they designed it to be so simple to change the head gasket. I know that's probably not the way they designed it, but surprisingly it is. Thank God it is, because if it was more complicated, even more would have gone to the scrapyard than what is around today. Because almost every Rover now will have done with a K series would have had a head gasket by now. There are very few Rovers, maybe later ones, that have not had a head gasket change, but will. They all will, because the beading on the original Elastomer gaskets, they tend to fail. They get soft from the oil and coolant, and then they sort of lift up, and then you get the mixing, and then you get oil going in the coolant reservoir. That's more likely, and then you may get a bit of coolant going in the oil, but again, it's actually more likely to start off with that you'll get oil in the coolant rather than pulling your dipstick and having white coolant at the end of it. That's the big draw. You may get some mayonnaise in the engine, you may not. Beatrix, her head gasket had gone, but it had not overheated. That is my conclusion from the whole work I did over a year and a half ago. It did not overheat, but it had the failure of the beading had gone soft. I could see that as soon as I took the head off, the beading had gone. Oh, it was lifting all over the place. So that was the problem. But it hadn't gone to a point where the oil had gone, the coolant had gone into the oil of the sump and started mayonnaising the whole head and everything. Because usually you see the pictures, don't you? You know, someone's taken the rocker cover off and it's like, wow, it's literally like milkshake. It's like chocolate milkshake. It's horrible. Beatrix's wasn't like that whatsoever. There was remnants in the corners, so I think if it had gone on a bit longer, I think it would have been kaput. But I don't think that car was driven very much before I actually bought it. So that's really the main problem. But the biggest problem is people who are just idiots look and ignore that temperature gauge, and that temperature gauge will move because you're not going to have as effective cooling. The oil is going to clog all the coolant passages and the radiator and the hose. It's going to be everywhere. It's going to be absolutely everywhere. You need to clean everything because oil is no good for your rubber hoses. They will crack all your rubber hoses. So luckily I didn't have much of that problem. There was remnants. There was evidence in corners, but essentially it wasn't too bad on mine. But then you'll get the overheating, and that's when the needle will start to move, and then people just keep on ignoring it. You keep on driving, and it'll just overheat, and bang, that's it. Well, it won't go bang, but it will just seize. You could end up heat seizing the engine and anything, but most likely it will smoke. You have no coolant in that bottle. You'll start smoking. Usually it's at high speed on the motorway, and that's when you've cooked your head. Now, the damage because of that could be irreparable without an engine rebuild. The cylinder head will need to be skimmed as a minimum in that case, and your liners probably would have sunk, because those liners, they just sit on the aluminium block underneath. They're only held on with Hylamar, and what happens is when the car overheats is the Hylamar tends to melt. It will melt, and the liners will sink even more and then sort of bite into the aluminium, and then it will sort of it will actually basically bite in even more than what it is, um, and then it's basically irreparable somewhat. You can use shims, but I'm not sure how successful that would be with shims. The shims will allow the liners to come back above the surface, but they won't be equal because the shims are the same size. Unless one was like, I don't know, let's say these shims are 1 foul. They're about 1 foul thick, okay? So if one liner was, let's say, 1 foul above the deck and one was free because it's overheated and one cylinder's dropped and one liner's dropped and one hasn't dropped as much, you'll have to use 2 shims to bring that back up to 3 foul. I don't know. But if you overheat your engine, most likely 3 foul is generous. You will have dropped those liners probably to the face of the block flush or below. And that's like, I would recommend another block. It would just be more easier. So that's your overheating issue, but most of them don't have the overheating issue, and therefore you're okay. When you take the head off, with the elastomer, you will see a couple of things that will be quite obvious. Namely, you will see some in sort of marks from the actual gasket itself, where the actual piston has been hammering into the head, and the gasket will start to push onto the head, even though the surface, that bottom surface of the cylinder head that mates to the head gasket, is a hardened surface. This is why skimming is not always necessary if you can avoid it. But basically, that surface gets battered by the pistons occasionally, especially if things are starting to loosen up a bit. But those stretch bolts will keep everything in situ. But you will get the smacking issue from the piston, and it will leave an indentation in the cylinder head. Now, those indentations probably will not be enough to make you think, oh, oh, there's a mark there, I need to skim the head. No, didn't on mine, didn't do that. So you don't need to do it essentially because of that, but people do. There is what they call a head saver shim to prevent that happening, but I believe that's mostly available with the MLS gasket, which I don't like. But in general, it wouldn't seem in once the mark has been made, I wouldn't necessarily think it would go further than that. I don't think it's completely necessary, to be honest with you. As soon as you have the head skimmed, the same thing will just happen again, but it will happen more quickly this time, because when you skim a head, and this is where I don't think head skimming is very necessary whatsoever, you get rid of that hardened surface. When you get rid of that hardened surface, in the future, that surface could easily become a bit more, what they say, porous. Some heads are not suitable for skimming. They are porous where the surface is all kind of bubbly and not flat and smooth, and you can't use it, mainly because of rust, potentially, from being exposed to all sorts of rubbish elements, but also excess whatever's in the fuel, to be honest with you. That could cause slight perforation on the surface of the aluminium itself, and that means that no gasket is going to seal that cylinder head, not one. So you'll need a new cylinder head, but that's very, very rare. The other thing is head skimming. If your car has not overheated, don't skim it. If there's no major flat lines, don't skim it. However, with mine, I had to clean it pretty thoroughly, actually, to remove any of the excess gasket. If you're struggling and you feel that this probably requires something more thorough, okay, go and take it to the machine shop. But don't skim ahead unless absolutely necessary. That head just have to be really, really, really clean. Also, I'd recommend with the block, you linish the block. I went over with some sandpaper, not thick stuff. I went over with some 800 grit, so not heavily abrasive, but enough to linish the block nicely because there were some marks from the elastomer gasket, like excess remains that have been left. And I don't want that there. I want it so I can run my finger along and it's just like literally pure aluminium, no indentations. You'll feel it with your finger. The other thing is with your liners. Now, this is why we're going to get to the point in this video here, because there's a number of people going out there and putting on the YouTube videos, oh, you got to use MLS gasket, never had a problem, deal away with this elastomer rubbish. And I do not listen to these people. They literally have done this to their car and it's failed. I can tell you what, most likely, if you use an MLS gasket with your car, it's going to weep a little bit of coolant. It will definitely fail earlier than if you used an uprated elastomer. Go to Discount MG Rover spares or a few other places. The elastomer gaskets now are much more higher quality than the ones Rover produced. And the ones that Rover produced, some cars are still running on them, which is ridiculous. I mean, what do you expect? I mean, some of them are 20 years old, Rover 25s and 45s, and still going on with the original elastomers. So much for design flaw, eh? So, but why do people say use the MLS? Well, basically, if you look back down the history, 2005, Land Rover used the K Series 1.8 in their Freelander. And in the Freelander, the 1.8, it's a marginal engine when it comes to head gaskets. The walls are thinner. It's not surprising. I thought that Beatrix's one was worse. I knew that it was a 1.8 being the CVT. And when I looked at the original sales advert for Beatrix, I thought, I'm taking a huge risk here because these 1.8s, they are quite head gasket eaters. They can go quite frequently. More frequently, I would say, than a 1614 at least. So I took that gamble. But the Freelander was even more marginal because you've got all that drivetrain shifting and vibration and harshness and what people use them for off-roading occasionally. I just think it's not an appropriate engine for that application. And Land Rover wanted to actually engineer a solution to this when Rover couldn't be asked. At least they did something about it, and it was in the form of the MLS gasket, the multi-layer steel gasket, which every other car manufacturer had been using since probably the 70s, 80s, most likely the 80s. And the solution was okay, but it depended on one particular thing. The main solution is the block needed to be pretty, well, the surface needs to be good, so the head does need skimming. And also the liners need to protrude above the block more than, I'd say, 2 or 3 thou. But they don't just need to be above the block by that much at least. They need to be level. They need to be perfectly level. You can't have one that's 5 and that's one that's 4 and one that's 3. You can't have that. You can't, you can have an engine that's 5, 5, 5, 3. You can't have that. It's unequal. That will leak at that end of that cylinder. That will leak. You know what I mean? The MLS gasket is not tolerant of unequal liner lengths. So you can't use it. I did the finger prick test. So when you take your head gasket off and it's all, oh yeah, got the cylinders, clean the cylinders out. You know, you saw me, I got a microfiber, and I tell you what, I got some carb cleaner down all them cylinders. You could still see the markings in the liners. Unbelievable. It's just, the homing marks are all there. It's just ridiculous. No wear at all to them liners. But I did the finger prick. Once I cleaned it up, I did the finger prick test. So you get your finger and you run it across to finger. As I said, I did all this on camera if you want to watch these videos, if you've not watched them. But you get your finger and you just feel for the ridge in the liner where it meets the block. And if you can feel a ridge, even a fraction of one, it's above the block. I don't know how many fell, don't ask me, because some people try and measure them. I don't really care, because I was always intent on using the Elastomer. I just wasn't going to put the MLS on. It's an old engine. The only reason, the only thing, the only application that, in my opinion, is useful and appropriate for a multi-layer gasket is if the block has been completely rebuilt with the liners perfect. Perfect. Go and get a block, a K-series block from Caterham, and you could use the MLS all day long. The MLS gasket has worked in the Kavachi engine for a start, and the N series, because they were highly redeveloped engines. The N series was less of a redevelopment, but they got it right. The Kavachi engine was a massive redevelopment of the K series into a new sort of it's the same engine, just tweaked, but it's very much reverse engineered, and there has been no failures of that engine. So it just proves that if Rover had spent 2 seconds looking at this, they'd have done it. Maybe Rover would have survived if they had actually sorted the K-series problem out. You see, the thing is, on the forums, and I'm not going to get distracted here, a lot of people, there's a lot of talk on the forums about the Rover project cars that have come out of the shell, and a lot of them that have like the prototypes, like a Rover 75 coupe. You should have had a Rover 45, a Rover 45 coupe. That would have been utterly amazing. You look at the body shell of a Rover 45 and you think they could have done a coupe version. Yeah, perfectly. There were so many prototypes, and people say, oh, they should have done this and they should have done that. It'd have been amazing. It would have saved the company. No, none of them would have. The K-series would have. If the K-series had actually been engineered not to fail at all, it would have gone on. The company would have gone on. Unfortunately, the head gasket failures is what people talk about. You ask anybody who has got a vague idea of what a Rover is, or a vague like interest in what their cars are, they will say, when was the last time you had that head gasket done? It's there. It's ingrained in the public consciousness, and you can't get rid of that. That's why the Rover name will never come back. It's dead as a company. But that is essentially how you go about that. You need a new block. If you want to use MLS, you need a new block. If you're not going to get a new block, or you know it's not being rebuilt, Elastomer. Because the Elastomer gasket, despite, I don't know if Rover engineers designed it to be this way, but it's actually, very, very strangely, it takes away the undulations and the differences in the liners. That beading actually takes all that away. So if a liner is fractured above, it will take away that difference and it will level it out. The beading will either crush a bit more or it won't crush as much more. That's the beauty of that gasket. It actually aligns itself to the liners perfectly. There is actually like a metal crushable washer that goes on top of the liner. That will crush down a little bit more. If it doesn't crush down a bit more, it's probably because the liner is probably a little bit higher. It's as simple as that. Which is why, by the way, if you were to fit an elastomer or whatever gasket, and you put all the head on and you get the car running and there's a problem. Let's say you've put a multi-layer gasket on and you've discovered it weeps, which it will eventually. It might not whip immediately, probably take a few journeys for it to heat in and bed in and do a few heat cycles. And then you discover a problem and you think, Christ, I've got to do it all over again. You can't reuse the gasket, whether it's a multi-layer or an elastomer for whatever reason. Although, if you do an elastomer, it's fit and forget as far as I'm concerned. I don't know why you would want to take it off again, unless you were concerned that there was a problem. Or you'd done it incorrectly. You have to reuse the gasket. You can't reuse the gasket, sorry. Words. And those stretch bolts as well. Those stretch bolts can be reused. I'm not being funny. Have you seen the amount of thread that goes into the sump through the oil rail? As I say, I've uprated the oil rail on mine. You see those bolts? They have like the thread sticks out that much into the sump through the oil block. So basically what you're saying is, the people that will say you can't use the stretch bolts again because they'd have stretched again. Now, I used all new bolts because I wanted to uprate the whole system, okay, with the new uprated oil rail. Wanted it to be stronger at the bottom end. The uprated oil rail is so important for the 1.8. It's crucial. Again, who designed that? Land Rover. Multi-layer gasket and the uprated oil rail with stronger bolts. They did all that. I don't believe in the multi-layer though. The multi-layer part didn't work very well because of the liner protrusion, and they do weep in the corners, unfortunately. And they do not tend to last as long as the elastomers. So you've got to do that job in mind that you're just going to be coming back to it again in the future. And it's one of them when someone on YouTube takes a Rover and says, oh, I think the head gasket might have gone, and they take the head off, and it's like, oh, great. It's one of these MLS bin jobs. And that's what I think of them. They're bin jobs. I just don't rate them at all. It is an option if you've had the block rebuilt, but as far as I'm concerned, that's the end of discussion about the MLS. But with the stretch belts in particular, the stretch belts, I've been doing stretch belts on the Focus recently, forgive me. The stretch bolts, you have to stretch that bolt by that much of a thread to actually not be able to use them again. So those people who say you can't reuse them, you can reuse them. Every K-series expert will say you can reuse them. But ideally, if you're going for new gaskets and new oil rate, just get some new uprated bolts. The new bolts are 10.5 rated, whereas the old ones were like 9.5 or something. I can't remember to my head. So they torque at a much higher yield. They were designed for the multi-layer gasket, but you can use them with the elastomer. I have. So no issues and great compression. That's the main thing at the end of the day. The advantage of as well, if you want to do a head skim, if you're not too sure and think, okay, let's have a head skim, it's not the end of the world. Just go to the machine shop and they'll do it for you. Excuse me. When you put it all back on, you'll find that you will have increased compression because you've just machined a tiny layer of the surface down. Your head is going to sit fractionally low. You never notice, but it's going to sit fractionally low in the combustion chamber. So you have increased the compression of your engine, and you might find that it's a bit more quicker. So that's why you use an elastomer over the MLS, simply because it's just appropriate for the application. And most people have fitted the high uprated elastomers from either Discount MG Rover Spares or Victor Rhines. They will absolutely be fine. There'll be no issues with them. I would expect that gasket to at least last 10-15 years on the mileage, maybe longer than that. Probably age will get to the beading again and will have to come off again, but so what? It will come off and it will have another one going on. You'll have another one and you'll have, the bolts can be reused, as I've said. It will just be a simple head gasket and probably a water pump. Change the coolants at the same time because you're going to drop it. Change the oil. Just have a bit of a general heavy duty surface, but with a head gasket chucked in. That is the Rover way of doing things. And it's great to find that most Rovers that survive today, they have had that head gasket change with the correct elastomer gasket. They will last a long time. And if they've had a skim, well, that's even better. It's increased compression. But as I say, mine hasn't had a skim, and many others haven't had a skim. They don't need a skim, realistically. I was a bit concerned on starting the car up originally with all the coolant coming out the exhaust that I might not have done a good enough job and it may not have worked. But turns out it was just ridiculous amounts of coolant, I think, stuck in that exhaust and the cat as well. So hopefully, but no damage done. But anyway, guys, I am going to leave you here. You can follow the Hound's manual when it comes to doing a head gasket change, or you can follow my step-by-step videos that I've done a while ago. I wanted to clear that up and get it off my chest because, quite frankly, to say that the MLS gasket is the best and only solution to the problem is a bit short-sighted. And I don't know if these people know what they're talking about. They may have done a job on their own and they may have got away with it, but I don't believe that, because the stories of MLS gaskets do not go very well in the Rover community. Elastomer all the way. Take care, guys. See you very soon.